Thank you so much to those in the room for joining us, and also thank you to those joining us online. Welcome to this side event convened by the International Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the Brazilian Bar Association. On behalf of the convening organisations, I thank the UNFCCC for the opportunity to convene in this important space. My name's Emily Morrison, and as a project lawyer in the IBA's Legal Policy and Research Unit, my role focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change and business human rights challenges on the legal profession and how the legal profession can respond to these challenges. For those who might not be familiar with the IBA represents the global voice of the legal profession, with over 80,000 individual lawyer members, around 300 law firms, and 190 bar associations and law societies spanning across over 170 countries. The IBA has been an observer organisation to the UNFCCC for the last 3 years, and we use this important platform to convene events in collaboration with other bar associations, civil society, and law firms to help elevate the role of the legal profession in responding to climate change across jurisdictions. The purpose of today's event is to explore the different approaches that lawyers are taking to supporting climate action, finance, and higher ambition by the private sector, as well as the ways that law associations and law societies can support this work. Before I introduce our excellent panel of speakers, both in the room and also online, I'd like to take a moment to highlight why it's important and timely that a side event at COP29 is devoted to the role of lawyers and bar associations in this space. As I'm sure everyone here is very aware and appreciates, the outcomes of COPs are important not only for their impact on the direct obligations of the negotiating parties, but also for the signals that they give to civil society organisations, businesses, investors, and also their lawyers about the global climate action priorities going forward. We know that last year at COP28, parties agreed the first global stocktake, that milestone first assessment of progress toward achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. That assessment found that countries are currently far from aligned with limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 and encourage parties to take a number of actions at a global level, including tripling global renewable energy capacity and doubling the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030, and transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems. Importantly, COP28 was also the COP that shone a spotlight on the role that professional service providers, including consultants, advertisers, and lawyers, can play in advancing climate action. At that conference, the UN Race to Zero and its expert peer review group launched a consultation paper considering how professional service providers might support decarbonisation through not only their operational emissions cuts, but also through addressing the emissions associated with their services or advice. Just a couple of months ago, at New York Climate Action Week in September, the UN Race to Zero released a report on the role of professional service providers in realising a net zero future. It noted that these providers are force multipliers with a considerable opportunity to drive the transition toward a 1.5 degree future, including through their approaches to legal work. That report noted initiatives by international law firms to understand the impacts of their legal advice in this space. In parallel, judges, bar associations, and leading academics across the world are considering how knowledge about climate change risks interacts with lawyers' professional competency requirements. In 2021, so about 3 years ago, Brian Preston, who is the Chief Judge of the Land and Environment Court of New South Wales in Australia, wrote that incorporating climate change consequences of actions in legal advice is a necessary corollary of the lawyer's duties to their clients, and that climate change is leading to changes in what is expected of a competent and careful lawyer. Since that time, we've seen a growing focus on climate competence, that concept that all lawyers have a professional duty to understand climate change sufficiently that they can advise clients about relevant climate-related risks and how to mitigate and adapt to them. Bar associations and law societies are leading the way in helping lawyers to put climate competent lawyering into practice, and we'll discuss some examples of that later in today's session. Turning now to COP29. In the first week of the conference, a UN expert group report was launched that highlighted the need for service providers and all other non-state actors to align their efforts to the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement. It noted the work of legal alliances such as the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance that show how service providers can proactively galvanise action through commitment and capacity building. One facet of the significance of this conference, of course, I'm sure you're all aware, is that it's the last conference before parties are due to submit their updated NDCs early next year. The COP29 presidency has encouraged all parties to come forward with 1.5 aligned, ambitious, comprehensive and robust new NDCs. And we've already heard some countries announce their NDCs at this conference. These NDCs will provide a roadmap for each country's action on climate through to 2035, and lawyers will play a critical role in turning those NDCs into action, whether through advising government on the legal implications of NDC targets or helping their business clients to understand the risks and opportunities to them that are signalled by these new NDCs. This is just one reason why it's critical for lawyers from all practice areas, not just those climate change specialists, to understand and be engaged on the significance of the UNFCCC legal regime and its developments. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'll start with those in the room before I introduce those on screen. Immediately to my right, we have Dr. Matthias Lang, who's the Vice Chair of the IBA's Energy, Environment, Natural Resources and Infrastructure Law section, and is also a partner at Bird & Bird. Next, we have Ghazal Husseinzad, who is the head of the International Cooperation Department at the Azerbaijani Bar Association. Next over from Ghazal, we have Professor Uma Otka, who's a fellow of the American Bar Association and a professor of law at the University of Kansas Law School. Next to Uma, we have Umi Jalilova, who is the managing partner and director of the Baku office at Grada International. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Juta Wada, who is a member of the Japan Federation of Bar Associations Climate Change Committee and is also a partner at Wada Law Office. Online today, we will have joining us Dr. Caio Borges, who is the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for File Foundation, and also Dr. Andre Lippert, who is a partner for Public Compliance and Public Affairs for CMS Germany. So with all of those introductions, I'd like to really just dive straight into the substance today by turning first to Dr. Lang to provide some of his insights on the roles that lawyers can play in achieving Paris Agreement implementation from his experience in practice. Over to you, Matthias. And also, I would like our speakers to provide a little bit more of an introduction for themselves before they dive into their content.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, we've heard quite a bit already. Maybe I start, as you said, with introducing myself. I've been around the climate change world actually for a while. I started as a student. So I may be dating myself when I say that in 1991, I went to university in Geneva, and as an intern at the University of Geneva, well, at the end of it, I thought I'd do something at the United Nations. I ended up with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and started writing training materials for young diplomats on their way to the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. So most of you know, 1992 Earth Summit, that was when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change started. So I've been following this for a while, sort of became a lawyer. After that, climate change wasn't much on the agenda, but I always remember that in Geneva in 1991, I had the first gentleman, in that case from Russia, telling me that climate change doesn't exist. Yeah, I've been around that area for a while. I'm now, as you said, partner of Bird & Bird, head of the infrastructure group of the firm, head of or co-head of the energy and utility sector group worldwide of the firm. And I'm doing ESG, as you might have suspected, as well. And on the hat I'm actually wearing today is the IBA hat. As you mentioned, the section for energy, environment, natural resources of infrastructure law of the International Bar Association. So what am I going to start with today is a bit the role of lawyers in these times where things are difficult, uncertain, I'm sure many of you in the room are involved as lawyers or have to do with lawyers. I think my initial comment is the role of law in all of the climate change discussion is massively underrated. One of the things where you can actually see this is where we are today. This is basically the last day of the thematic days of this climate conference, and sort of we have sort of this somewhat tagged on to the end of the session, which I think is very unfortunate because climate change. If we want to do something about climate change, yes, we need those wonderful framework agreements, which, me 1991 is law, but really to actually make it happen, you need laws to do it. And to some degree, they seem to come as an afterthought. And then we see later on why things go wrong because we don't think things through to start off with. But on a more positive note, with my IBA hats, at least the section for energy, environment, natural resources, and infrastructure law, it has six committees: environmental, health and safety, international construction projects, mining law, oil and gas law, power law, and water law. All of those lawyers, in some form or fashion, have to do with climate change. And it's at that level that we actually make specific differences. So I think there are far too many areas to mention them because I think we agreed everyone has 6 minutes or so for the introductory piece. But there is a lot of expertise on the level of the lawyers around the world. And I think this is something that we need to think about. And there are many, and I think we will come to that when we speak to the role of the associations, all of the great jobs that the law associations around the world do in training people to understand that and actually make things happen. Just two small parts that I just want to mention before the others take over with their elements. Obviously, what lawyers deal with is climate, legal advice, and compliance. Our clients have to understand what they're supposed to do. Sounds like an easy task, but it's really difficult. I do nothing but energy and regulatory matters, and I have difficulties in getting my head around some of the things that are happening in law. I happen to teach it as well, and every year when I sort of prepare for the course, I look, all the things that have changed is very difficult to understand. So, as I mentioned before, often the legal implementation comes as an afterthought after the big political ideas. And that is one of the problems why we may be losing people along the way of climate change, because when it arrives sort of at their desk, in their homes, in their companies, this is complicated. It's too complicated, and it's sometimes too difficult to understand. So we need to make sense of many of the rules so that our clients can understand what this is. And I think all of us who are active in this area can speak hours on all the strange and wonderful things that have happened to our clients trying to be compliant and the challenges they had. So I think I'm not going to do that. And I've just mentioned the clients, the authorities, the state actors who have to get it done have often exactly the same problem. They sit in front of the legislation, they have to do something with it, and they need intelligent, pragmatic lawyers also within the authorities to actually make it work. Finally, on my agenda, climate policy advocacy. Lawyers work with policymakers to make new things. So we advocate one way or the other. We try to make laws better applicable. We work on implementing international, supranational, and national frameworks. the Paris Agreement implementing. I mean, someone from Europe, we actually have the European level that we need to implement on the national level, and we need to work on the advocacy side to help try to improve it. So I think that's about my part. I think another aspect, if I understand correctly, Andre is next. Is that correct? So if Andre is correct, then he has a very practical example of advising that case the government or ministries. So I don't know where he is. Can we see you on the screen, Andre?
Yes, I'm here.
That'd be fantastic if we might be able to now turn to Andre Lippert on the screen. And Andre, I'd like you to just introduce yourself briefly before you dive into exactly, as Matthias mentioned, a really practical example of the ways that lawyers can actively facilitate the implementation of whether it's an NDC or a sustainability policy at a government level into practical legal frameworks that then work for financing in this case. Over to you, Andre.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I can see and hear you very well, so I hope the same is for you. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, for having me, and for the possibility to take part in this session. I'm really a little bit sad because yesterday we had the chance to have a coffee together, and now as you might see on the background, I'm back in Berlin. I've just arrived an hour ago, so I had to return and couldn't be on the ground anymore. But until yesterday, I was there, and I was there with some colleagues. We were a team of 7 and 8 colleagues from all over the world, and we attended the COP. We took part in a lot of sessions, and most of all, we always discussed that topic, which is also today our topic here, and this is why I'm very glad to have at the end of my part of the COP this year the possibility to take part in your session. So you asked me to introduce myself a little bit. That's fine, and I would really like to make it as quick as possible as I can. I'm working as a lawyer for 10 years now. I just looked it up. I started in 2013 as a German lawyer. Before that, I began working in the Federal Ministry of Health first, and then in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Technology in Germany. So it was the other way around as some others do it. It was always in the planning department, and this in Germany, it's the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Change today. So the same ministry has changed the name a little bit, and also when I worked there, climate change, energy law was one of the topics which was responsible, where the minister was responsible for. So this is where I started, and then 10 years ago I became a lawyer, and I always worked in the field of a public law, as you, Emily, has already mentioned it. It was a public law compliance and especially sustainability matters. This includes climate change, energy law, and as Matthias has already pointed out, a lot of compliance with these regulatory requirements related to environmental protection, climate change, sustainability, and also including adjustment of internal organizations or internal approaches of companies and public bodies to adapt to these requirements. So as already mentioned, I thought about making one really concrete and specific example, because I thought that it would be the best to give you perhaps a little bit of insights what we are doing as lawyers when we're working for the climate change. And as I've brought along 2 examples, I will start with one first because I have my 6 minutes, and perhaps we could have the other one later. But this is one work which we are currently doing. I work a lot in these for these clients and in this matter, and we have a team of I'm not quite sure, but over 30 lawyers, if I'm not wrong, 30 lawyers working in Germany. And this is called the Carbon Contracts for Difference, which, and this is why I mentioned it when I introduced myself, where we advise the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection and on how to translate these strategy how to translate these carbon contracts for difference into real life, how to implement them, and how to enforce them. So these to give you some sentences about what we are dealing with. These carbon contracts of difference, some of them might know them. It's in fact, in Germany, it's the first bidding process for these contracts, which was launched in March 2024, though in the first half of this year. And currently we are preparing for the second bidding process. The first process has come to an end. We have the decisions for about 17 industries, companies. There were more in the bidding process, but at least 17 were successful. And the second bidding process is just being prepared. And these carbon contracts for difference make it possible to subsidize investments in new installations and current operational costs. And these costs are subsidized because they must be used to transfer the industries into a low carbon energy production or a low carbon production. It applies for emission intensive plants, for example, steel, paper, chemical, metal, glass industries. All these industries who are emission intensive could apply for these carbon contracts for difference, and then there's a bidding process, and at the end there's a decision, and if they are successful, they can be subsidized to investments to convert, as to say, their installations into a more climate protected implementation. So 4 billion euros has already been made available in this first bidding process, and more are to follow, as I already said, in the second row. And we expect that around about 350 million tons of CO2 could be avoided over the terms of the funding program, which is until 2045, in fact. So it's very long. It's a very long time, and in this time we expect that millions of tons of CO2 could be avoided because of supporting the transformation, the green transformation of industries. And we as lawyers in this context have, for example, advised the ministry on draft funding guidelines, which are necessary to draft and to provide comprehensive advice. We provided comprehensive advice, for example, on the legal drafting and development of new state aid scheme, and even supported the government with the European Commission for the negotiations for the subsidies, which must be notified at the European Commission. So these are some of the works. There are lots of works. As I already said, it's almost 30 lawyers who are working on this project, and every day a lot of question comes up. But this is a very specific, very concrete example how, to my opinion, lawyers could contribute to make law watertight to some respect and strengthen the belief of the society, of politics, of companies, that there is a commitment and a common goal of our goals to transform industries, to make them more climate reliable, and this commitment to transpose it into law is something which is, to my understanding, very important. We have a lot of common goals. We have a lot of commitments seen in the last years, but I personally, if I may say so, support the idea of our government to subsidize the transformation of the industries, of emission-intensive industries, by these projects. And we as lawyers contribute to make it watertight, to make it reliable, to help to enforce and implement these law and help industries to adapt them to the new requirements. This is what I wanted to show you as an example. Perhaps we can go more into details. As I already said, I have another project which I can mention later on, but for the first time, for the first 6 minutes, I think this is the first insight I wanted to provide you with.
Thank you so much, Andre. Yes, I'm sure we'll be very interested to hear some further examples soon. And before I go on, could I have a show of hands in the room how many of you are lawyers? Vast majority for our online speakers, maybe 90%. Very helpful. Now to turn to a different geographical location, but also a very different way in which lawyers can really actively facilitate climate action. We're going to Caio Borges, who is the Regional Director at FILE Foundation for the Latin America and Caribbean. Thank you so much, Caio, for joining us. Please do give some more background to your own sort of experience and legal career before you dive into your work at FILE and trends that you're seeing in climate litigation and the role that lawyers play in that.
Thank you, Emily. Just checking if you can hear me well.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'd like to congratulate the three bar associations for organizing this side event. Very quickly about myself. I'm a lawyer also by training, and I have been in climate philanthropy for 5 years now. Before that, I practiced human rights law, and I also worked as in-house legal counsel within private financial institutions. And just like what lawyers can do in philanthropy. In my case, I have been working with several partners in Brazil and in Latin America and the Caribbean in developing the legal capacities of the field to tackle climate change. And we work with several institutions. We work with civil society organizations, law enforcement agencies, research institutions, legal clinics, but we also work with climate scientists and other types of climate experts who are doing amazing work in climate litigation and beyond. So this is really a job that in which we develop the legal capacities of several actors. But now turning to the substance of my contribution here to this panel, I have been asked to speak a little bit about climate litigation. I would start just by throwing some figures here in the latest global snapshot report by the Grantham Institute. We see that there are more than 2,600 cases documented across 55 jurisdictions. And from these cases, 70% have been filed after 2015, the year of adoption of the Paris Agreement. So we can clearly see a strong relationship between the adoption of the Paris Agreement and the pursuit of climate litigation in several countries. And I would say that, many examples, some of them I will briefly explore here, have demonstrated that climate litigation can be a powerful tool to drive climate action. And this has been recognized actually by the IPCC itself, which has acknowledged that the growing role of climate litigation can influence climate policy and governance. And in the sixth assessment report, the IPCC recognized that climate litigation can affect the outcome and ambition of climate governance. So it's really a landmark recognition by the IPCC of the increasing significance of legal action in driving climate action. And I thought I could, maybe some of you can be quite familiarized with the cases, but hopefully by illustrating some important domestic base cases, but also what's happening at the international arena with some recent advisory opinions, I could illustrate why climate litigation is really reshaping climate policy and governance. So I just selected a few cases from different jurisdictions, starting with what I believe is the first landmark case that was ruled by a Supreme Court, the Oeganda case in the Netherlands. And that case, basically, the Dutch Supreme Court confirmed lower instance rulings that the target of the Dutch government was insufficient. And then it ordered the government to increase its ambition by cutting greenhouse gas emissions by at least 25% by 2020 compared to the 1990 levels. And then this decision really set like the first global precedent for holding governments accountable for climate action. And it has inspired similar cases in other countries. And a recent decision by the South Korean Supreme Court is an example of that. The second case, the Neubauer case, it was a case that was brought before the German Constitutional Court. And then that case had as the underlying discussion whether the German climate law was sufficient or insufficient for the protection of future generations. And the German court, the German Constitutional Court, found that the German legislation, the Climate Act, because it lacked intermediary targets and other key elements, it was inadequate for protecting future generations. So this was a landmark case because the German Constitutional Court really developed and built on the constitutional meaning of the right of future generations for stronger climate ambition. Here, where I'm based in Brazil, the Climate Fund case has also been an important development at domestic level. This case, the Supreme Court had to rule on the inactivation of the Climate Fund, which is Brazil's main climate finance instrument. And in its rationale, the court ruled that the Paris Agreement is a human rights treaty, and in our case, this means that the Paris Agreement sits above statute, ordinary state policy, so it gives really a special legal status to the Paris Agreement. And then the last case, these are already going to the regional level. At the European level, the Klima Senioren case, it's an important case from the European Court of Human Rights, in which the European Court determined that Switzerland, the Swiss climate policies were insufficient to address the risks posed by climate change, especially for vulnerable populations like the elderly. So these, I mean, of course, I'm not going into details because of the time, but these cases, I think these cases together, they demonstrate that courts have been progressively consolidating legal criteria for scrutinizing government and legislatures on how they enact, implement, and account for climate policies. And very often, if not all, in all cases, the courts, they have relied strongly on climate science. And these cases, they have also really had like real world effects because they have somehow made ordered governments to take more ambitious climate action, improve climate laws and policies, increase transparency and accountability over the implementation of climate related policies. And as we saw in the case of Brazil, to also ensure the correct functioning of climate finance instruments. I'd like to also highlight the role of international courts in advancing through what we could call as semi-litigation at this point. 3 international courts have been called upon by states to develop and issue advisory opinions on climate change. One of them has already issued its advisory opinion, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. And that court, for instance, reinforced the interconnectedness between climate change and ocean health and protection. But we are also waiting for very anticipated advisory opinions by the Inter-American Court on Human Rights and the International Court of Justice. They are right now in the process of building and issuing 2 very awaited advisory opinions on the relationship between climate change, human rights, and international law. Finally, I'd like, just because I assume that some of you might be interested in the recent decision by the Hague Appeals Court on the very known case of Shell against Milieudefensie. As you might have read in the news, very recently on 12th of November, the Hague Court of Appeal ruled on the Milieudefensie climate case against Shell, and it understood that Shell has an obligation to combat dangerous climate change, but the court ultimately refrained from imposing any compulsory emissions cut. Despite the reversal of the lower court remedy, this case, the appeal court upheld several of the principles and interpretation of the lower court, which I'd like to briefly highlight some of the key findings of the court. The first is that the protection against dangerous climate change is a human right, that Shell and other companies that have historically contributed to climate change have an obligation to protect human rights, and to contribute to the achievement of the Paris Agreement's targets. The court briefly stated that investment in new oil and gas fields may be at odds with the Paris Agreement, although it refrained again from making any determination on that sense because it was not in the original scope of the case. And the court also determined that EU legislation, such as the EU carbon market, does not prevent companies from having broader emission reduction obligations. So in essence, the Hague Appeal Court reaffirmed that corporations can be held accountable for their climate impacts. It based its decision on scientifically established limits to fossil fuel expansion. And then it highlighted the importance of, in the future, developing clear sectoral pathways to provide concrete standards for courts then to determine specific sector or company-wide emission reduction targets. So I really believe that the Shell case establishes a potential pathway for holding corporations accountable for their climate impact. And it could also have, just as the Urgenda case in the same jurisdiction, ripple effects on other jurisdictions. So in sum, we can see that these cases can demonstrate the potential of climate litigation to drive significant policy changes, to hold government and corporations accountable for their climate impacts by leveraging the power of climate law, but also the role of climate activists and the role of climate science as well. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you, Caio. And actually, of those lawyers in the room, are any of you specifically focused around litigation? A small number. I know that there's another side event, I think, later this afternoon that will really hone in on that case that I'm sure will be of great interest. Before I turn to Umi for her comments, I should note that we will have some time for Q&A at the end of the session, and we really love to hear from you, your own practical insights on what it's like being a lawyer in the climate space, for those of you that are, but also just your questions for the panelists, for those who aren't. And we will provide some refreshments as well at 4:30, so please do stay with us. Now turning back to wonderful Umi Jalilova in the room today, it'd be great to hear from you some of your insights as a local practitioner in Baku on the legal landscape here and your own experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. First, I would like to thank International Bar Association for organizing this event and inviting me to join such distinguished experts in the panel discussions. And thank you all for attending this event. Well, as Emily introduced, I'm a managing partner of Grata International Law Firm's Baku office. We are providing legal support to both local and foreign companies investing in Azerbaijan in different sectors of business economy, including the energy, power, and other projects as well. Well, when speaking about Azerbaijan, we all know, of course, that Azerbaijan is known as an oil and gas country, but since ratification of the Paris Convention in 2016, Azerbaijan has shown real commitment toward implementation of its goals and targets. First, it has to be mentioned that legal framework has been improved. Many strategy documents have been adopted since 2016, especially after enactment of the law on use of renewable energy in production of electricity in Azerbaijan and attracting the foreign investors to the renewable energy potential of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan gave a start to big-scale projects in renewable energy. We have them ongoing, and based on the information we have, a few new projects are still to be announced and commenced very soon. Since 2023, many strategy documents were adopted. Among them, strategy on socioeconomic development of Azerbaijan from 2022 to 2026, strategy on sustainable finance for the term from 2023 to 2026, and recently adopted national water strategy effective from October 10th of 2024. These are just a few of the documents that have been adopted with the aim of reflecting the principles targets and goals of the Paris Convention and NDCs. That being said, we as lawyers still have a lot to do, both in lawmaking and institutional reforms side. Unfortunately, major laws addressing environmental protection still lack references to the climate change and the risks that come with climate changes. Among those, we can mention, of course, water code. One of the problems Azerbaijan faces in climate changes is water scarcity. We all know, and unfortunately, even water code does not properly address those issues. And other laws aimed at protecting the environment still need to be improved. So what we hope is that COP29 will push toward the faster lawmaking process, both on the government side, on the parliament side, and the private sector initiating such changes. Yet another area where we expect to see the active role of lawyers is the development of the legal framework for green finance. We know COP29 is a finance COP. And now that Azerbaijan has announced that it pledges 1.2 billion US dollars for green projects to support and accelerate low carbon transit, we are keen to see what will be the form of the funding available. Will it be in the same conventional loan format as it has been so far, or green finance instruments will also be introduced? Green loans, green bonds, as by the way, prescribed by the roadmap and action plan on sustainable finance for the next years to come. Of course, lawyers will have to be actively engaged in lawmaking process, not only on the government side, but also private sector will be actively involved in discussions and negotiations over the draft of these laws to ensure that funds are allocated and distributed in a just and accessible manner, so that not only the big stakeholders, not only big foreign government-owned companies can be engaged and involved in the renewable energy projects, for example, in Azerbaijan, but also small and medium-sized enterprises can also be involved in such projects. Another area where we expect lawyers' roles to be activated is institutional changes, especially in the establishment of the monitoring and evaluation institution. And of course, legal framework will have to be provided for the activity of such institution to make sure that the authorities, powers, and responsibilities of this institution is clearly defined and distinguished from those of the agencies operating in the same direction already. As we see, role of the lawyers have always been and is going to be even more active in lawmaking, in institutional reforms to ensure the implementation of the Paris Convention. However, for effective implementation of the strategy documents, NDCs, and Paris Convention, it is essential to ensure that not only the laws are in place, but the responsibility for implementation of those laws also lies with the very well trained lawyers and specialists across all sectors. And unfortunately, here we also are facing some issues because, for example, not all universities and law schools in Azerbaijan offer environmental law and climate LLM degrees. We have only few of such programs, only few. So we believe we need to invest more in capacity building of specialists in almost all sectors, but especially the training of lawyers should be at the forefront of the efforts and attention. I would like to quote the National Adaptation Plan. It says that one of the barriers in climate adaptation in Azerbaijan is insufficient institutional and technical capacity in climate adaptation on managerial, expert practitioners, and community levels. So in the National Adaptation Plan itself, it is mentioned that capacity building is very important across all sectors. So to achieve that, one of the priorities should be exchange and sharing of knowledge and practice. So again, with that aim, I believe, first of all, universities should first offer LLM degrees or certificate programs, maybe executive programs for those willing to be specialized in the environmental law and climate matters. Also, we have state program on education abroad, which provides for state funding for those willing to undertake a foreign law degree, not law, foreign degree programs offered by the universities in America, in the Europe, etc. Unfortunately, among the prioritized degree programs listed in that program, well, actually, the list has been provided by the Minister of Education for implementation of the program. There is no single legal degree program mentioned. So we have to admit that the priority list for 2023-2026 very well establishes grounds for allocating funds toward environment and climate in all sectors, healthcare, IT, agriculture, etc. But environment law and climate law degrees, they have not been mentioned in the priorities list. We believe this has to be included in the list. Again, not only the foreign degree programs, but also local degree programs should be available. And as a beginning, we believe for the at least first 5-10 years period, this will be better if such programs are offered in collaboration with foreign universities as joint degree programs, so that within several years, we already have adequately trained local specialists who can take forward and offer purely local university degrees in the same direction. So that's all from me. Sorry if I've taken a lot of time. I would like to give the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Umi, and thank you for highlighting the importance of capacity building in this space. And I'll also be really interested to hear from Ghazal what some of her thoughts are around what the impact of COP29 could be for the legal profession in Azerbaijan going forward. But going on to that capacity building piece, I'd like to pivot our conversation a little bit to focus in a little bit more on the role of bar associations and law societies in supporting lawyers to embed climate change in legal advice. Because obviously bar associations are another form of non-state actor that can play a really active role in supporting climate action through their engagement with members. I'll just provide some brief comments on what the IBA's been doing in this space, and then I'd love to hear from Uma about the work of the ABA, the American Bar Association. In 2014, the IBA Presidential Task Force on Climate Justice and Human Rights released a report on achieving justice and human rights in an era of climate disruption. And that set out recommendations for legal, regulatory, and institutional reforms at a whole range of levels to enhance climate mitigation and adaptation worldwide. Following on from that report, the IBA published a model statute for proceedings challenging government failure to act on climate change. And the purpose of that statute was helping to assist individuals and also to communities to access courts so that they could challenge government action or inaction on climate. More recently, in 2020, and some of the work that I've been more actively involved in since I joined the IBA published a climate crisis statement, which sets out its position on the role of the legal profession in responding to climate change. Among other things, this statement urges lawyers to, acting of course in accordance with their professional conduct rules and the rule of law, to consider advising clients on the risks, liability, and reputational damages that can arise from activities that exacerbate climate change. And of course, we know that as the science on climate just gets ever more clear by the day, those risks and liability risks, litigation risks, they only become clearer. It also encourages bars to engage with law students and law schools on the legal elements of climate change through their educational programs. And I think that really speaks to what Umi was getting at just before. Since the IBA published that climate change statement, we've seen other bars across the world declare similar commitments to addressing climate change. And earlier this year, the IBA launched what's called the IBA Climate Registry to essentially provide an online platform for bar associations and law societies from wherever they are in the world to upload the particular initiatives that they are undertaking to address climate change. Just last week, we saw the Law Association of Zambia, for example, upload its climate change statement that it adopted in October. And to my knowledge, that's the first of any law association in Africa to do so, which was just fantastic. And it's certainly a statement that I recommend that you all take a look at in your spare time. Before we move on to Uma, the only other aspect of the IBA's work in this space that I'd like to briefly highlight is the role of the IBA's committees in highlighting the relevance of climate change to particular areas of legal practice through their specialist conferences. And of course, next year, a number of committees of the IBA will host the IBA's third annual ESG conference in Paris, where of course, climate change will feature strongly. And Matthias can, of course, speak more to that later, should you have any questions. But with that brief synopsis of what's going on at the IBA in this space, Uma, I'd love to turn to you for some of your insights about the American Bar Association's work. And of course, you've got such a rich and valuable academic perspective that you can add to this conversation. So I'd love to hear your reflections as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, and for your hard work organizing this panel. I'm just delighted to be here. I'm Professor Uma Autka. I teach at the University of Kansas School of Law in the United States. I consider it a great privilege to have the opportunity to introduce students to the fields of environmental law, energy law, climate change, and the concepts of environmental and energy justice. So very much appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel as ABA's delegate to COP29 for this purpose. So as Emily said, the ABA is one of the largest voluntary associations of lawyers in the world, and one of its highest priorities is promoting the best quality of legal education, competence, ethical conduct and professionalism, and pro bono and public service work in the legal profession. I'm honored to be able to share with you briefly how the ABA has approached these priorities in the areas of sustainable development and climate change. The ABA has a history spanning 3 decades now of leading our profession to recognize and respond to these critical issues. The ABA's first resolution committing to sustainable development principles was in 1991, the year before the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was adopted. And this commitment was reaffirmed in 2003, again 10 years later in 2013. And these reaffirmations have been characterized as a call to all governments, lawyers, and ABA entities to act in ways that accelerate progress towards sustainability. In a 2015 report of the ABA Task Force on Sustainable Development, it stressed that sustainable development issues are becoming ubiquitous in law practice. So ABA has long had a representative to the UN, and in 2018, the ABA Board of Governors approved the representative to work toward the specific purpose of enhancing globally the reputation of the ABA as a trusted partner of the United Nations, advocate for the rule of law, access to justice, defender of human rights, and implementation of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. One of these goals, of course, is to take action to combat climate change and its impacts. Soon after, in 2019, the ABA adopted Resolution 111, urging governmental entities, but also the private sector, to recognize their obligation to address climate change, and specifically urging all lawyers to engage in pro bono activities to aid the efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change, as well as to advise clients of the risks and opportunities that climate change provides. This resolution strengthened prior resolves with its expansion to include the private sector and its emphasis on the urgency of climate change in the US and around the globe. In 2021, the ABA expanded on this theme to urge law firms, lawyers, law schools, and state, local, tribal, and specialty bar associations to include and consider environmental justice communities as stakeholders in decision-making and implementation of law and policy. Since that time, the ABA has continued to consider the relationship between climate change and the duty of competence in modern law practice, and in particular, how the ABA and other bar associations can institutionally foster greater climate competence among lawyers. So to that end, this past summer, the ABA took another step forward with Resolution 513. 513 specifically resolves two key points that are relevant to the panel discussion. First, the ABA urges lawyers to learn about sustainable development and to counsel their clients on related risks and opportunities. As the report accompanying the resolution explains, only with an understanding that climate change, resource depletion, and social inequity pose significant risks to businesses, their stakeholders, and society as a whole, can lawyers help their clients to identify, consider, and address potential legal, financial, and reputational risks associated with unsustainable practices. Second, and especially on point to this discussion, the resolution describes how the ABA can take the lead in supporting lawyers to develop this modern competency. Specifically, the resolution states that the ABA should provide resources such as educational materials, practical tools, training programs, best practices, and guidance to assist lawyers to incorporate sustainable development into their practice and pro bono activities. What's critical here is the ABA's focus on the role it can play in driving real-world impact through practical application, outreach, and resources needed for lawyers to develop climate competency. This is a unique leadership opportunity for all bar associations. And in addition, bar associations are uniquely situated to provide fora for exchange of ideas among lawyers who are working on the leading edge of these issues in their fields. Importantly, Resolution 513 does not limit its relevance to lawyers engaged in public international law and environmental law, as Emily suggested. On the contrary, the resolution is specifically referencing sections on business law, science and technology law, real property, trust and estate law, litigation, solo, small firm, general practice, and more. Climate change is relevant to insurance law, finance and banking, tax law, water law, trade law, energy, agriculture. Its reach is vast, and this underscores the need to develop field-specific climate competence over time. So in closing, the ABA is pleased to share this record of leadership in the US and through international engagement on these issues, but at the same time, ABA is only increasing its activities in these areas. With its most recent action, ABA has challenged itself to help lawyers to see how climate change affects their clients and their legal practice, and going further, highlighting climate competence as a growing expectation in a rapidly changing legal landscape. So for bar associations just getting started in this area, the ABA strongly supports their efforts and is ready to serve as a resource and ally in that work. For the ABA, an important part of leadership is collaboration with other bars. And so we welcome the chance to engage with the representatives of other bar associations here at COP29. Given the magnitude of climate change, the challenge ahead is to support lawyers everywhere to integrate climate into their work. And in turn, it will be important for all lawyers to determine what climate competent lawyering really means in the context of their specific clients and tasks. So I'll stop there and thank you again, Emily, for organizing. I look forward to hearing from those of you in the room when we get to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uma. And absolutely, many of you will be members of your bar associations just by virtue of your legal qualifications. So I really do encourage you to take a look at what your bar association is doing in this space, because it is somewhere where we're seeing so much activity across different jurisdictions that has impact. But certainly so much more needs to be done. Ghazal, I'd love to turn to you next from the perspective of your work at the Azerbaijani Bar Association. Could you tell us a bit how you see the role of the legal profession and your bar association in responding to climate change?
Dear participants, guests, and colleagues, I warmly welcome all of you here to this distinguished gathering, and I would like to express my gratitude to all the organizers for bringing us here together. And special thanks to Emily for all her guidance and support throughout the process. I would like to say that it's a privilege and honor to be here today with you and sharing this platform and discussing one of the pressing issues of our time, the climate change. I believe that climate change requires collaborative action, so therefore we should unite all our knowledge or all our determination and efforts. Okay. As it was mentioned, I serve as the head of international cooperation at the Azerbaijani Bar Association. I hope I'm audible. Yes. Yes. I serve as the head of international cooperation at the Azerbaijani Bar Association. For those of who is not familiar with the Azerbaijani Bar Association, I would like to give a brief introduction. It's independent, self-regulating, and non-governmental organization that unites all practicing lawyers across the country. And our main aim is to make sure that the legal advice provided by our lawyers is professional, high quality, and honest. Beyond that, we give big role in providing trainings for our lawyers and making sure that they comply with the international standards. And why I'm here today. So my main job in the Azerbaijan Bar Association is bridging between the international organizations and the members of the Bar Association and making sure that our lawyers are able to address the global challenges and transnational challenges. So jumping into question, I would like to mention that today lawyers are nearly behind every major decision, starting from drafting international contracts, jumping into providing legal advices, and in the policies that are provided by the different corporations. So the Bar Association, as the cornerstone of the legal profession, here play a role of guide for the lawyers. And the Azerbaijani Bar Association fulfills this mission by providing trainings, which are provided in offline, online, and in hybrid forms to make it accessible for all the lawyers across the country. And when it comes to our topic, the climate law, today we are developing sustainable program that enhances the lawyers' understanding on how the climate law can interact with other fields of law, such as administrative law, such as criminal law, and human rights. Moreover, the next session of these trainings are to be on 23rd of November for those of you who are interested. Beyond the mission of training, we are advisory body to the government, so therefore we are looking through all the drafts of law and make sure that they comply with international standards and national priorities. And I would like to tell that Azerbaijani Bar Association also is interested to take part in international events. So therefore, we recently have, as a Bar Association, with our head, the chairman of the Bar Association, we have participated in climate law conferences where our lawyers have shared their insights and have shared their practices and held the speeches. And our lawyers also play a role on-hand initiatives. For instance, they have launched a park, and we have launched a tree planting campaign, and we have renewable bins for batteries and paper in all our offices, and constantly our lawyers take part in seaside cleaning. So we want to highlight that not only by law, but also in taking a collective action, we are trying to address the climate action today. Yeah, and coming to the significance of COP29 to the Azerbaijan and to our bar association today, I would like to mention that it's a platform where we can share international expertise, where our lawyers can get international expertise. And the Bar Association here wants to make sure that our lawyers are engaging with the international community and are able to address the rising transnational challenges. As we know, the climate is not something that relates to one country, and it's rather a global and transnational issue. Therefore, we have to make sure that every lawyer is trained well and equipped well to address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ghazal. Sorry, turn my microphone off. Finally, certainly not last but not least, and if I could ask for those presentation slides to be brought up, we have Mr. Juta Wada of the Japan Federation of Bar Associations, who's been working in this space for well over a decade, perhaps much more. Juta, we'd love to hear your insights from your years at the JFBA about what work that Bar Association has been doing and what you see going forward.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this side event. And hello, everyone. My name is Juta Wada. I am an attorney at law in Japan and a member of JFBA. JFBA is Japan Federation of Bar Associations. And in this part, I like to show you some JFBA's activities as an example of Bar Associations activities. Please refer to the presentation on the screen too. And JFBA has a committee on pollution control and protection of the environment. And under this committee, we have a subcommittee on climate change. And it was established in 2008. And I was a member. I have been a member of this subcommittee for about 15 years from the beginning. And since 2008, that is for more than 15 years, we actually, the subcommittee on climate change prepared many opinion letters on climate change and delivered them to national government and or local governments and or business group. And in the name of JFBA. And the recent one made by JFBA is a declaration on renewable energies, etc. And it was adopted on 4th October 2024 this year. And in this declaration, we focused on renewable energies and how much and how fast we can promote the renewable energies in Japan. And in order to our declaration correct as much as possible, we have conducted a lot of document research and on-site visits to many places and interviewed a lot of people relating to renewable energies, and then prepared the draft declarations. And so it was adopted this October. And yes, I'd like to show some points of this declaration. First of all, this declaration is addressed at national government, local governments, and business group and citizens, including lawyers. And sorry, I have to Yes, this one. And the first page shows the concept of this main concept of this declaration. And so we recommended that the national, local governments, private companies, and citizens recognize that the current global warming endangers human rights, and so act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a manner consistent with the realization of the 1.5 target. And then, we recommended that more importantly, or more concretely, they means the national and local governments should establish and improve legal systems to promote photovoltaic power generation on the roofs of buildings and on abandoned agricultural lands, and also to promote agrivoltaics, because they have a lot of potentials in Japan, according to our investigation. And also, we recommended that the national and local governments should introduce a legal system taking into account the contribution to local economy and protection of local environment when they promote the renewable energies. That is some point in the declaration. And I'd like to mention about a characteristic of JFBA. In Japan, we have an act which called Attorneys Act in Japan. And Article 1 provides that an important mission of lawyer in Japan is to protect fundamental human rights and also achieve social justice. Under this provision, we, as members of JFBA and also as lawyers, we have acted in the subcommittee on climate change and delivered a lot of opinions, including declarations. And to finalize my comment, I'd like to note that no matter whether a country has a law or an act providing a mission of lawyers, it should be or would be a common sense that lawyers are responsible for protecting human rights and to realize social justice. So not only Japan Bar Associations, but also any bar associations can try to make some opinions on climate change. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Juta. And what I really like about some of the comments from our panelists from bar associations is that you can see that bar associations can really play that role in capacity building with their lawyers, helping them to understand what climate competence is in legal practice, the importance of integrating climate risk into their legal advice. But there's also that piece around actually commanding action from government. And the Japan Federation of Bar Associations has issued, as Juta pointed out, that was one declaration, but there are others really urging the government to align its action with the Paris Agreement and to otherwise advance ambition on climate change. So thank you very much for those comments. We do have 15 minutes left for questions, so it would be fantastic to just get a microphone because I think we've got quite a few to come through. I saw you in the front. Perhaps if you could absolutely, when a microphone arrives to you, perhaps just say your name and your organization, and then with your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Nico. Just to briefly introduce, as you said, I am from the International Board of ELSA, the world's largest association of law students and young lawyers. We are present in 43 countries on about 400 law faculties and around 70,000 members in Europe. And our purpose is to contribute to legal education of law students and young lawyers and help them foster social responsibility and mutual understanding. And now I will just briefly do another introduction because I will get to the capacity building part. And so within our wide portfolio of projects, we focus on capacity building within lawyers' potential career paths in many fields: human rights law, rule of law, social responsibility, international trade law, company law, criminal law, etc., etc. However, our international focus program on law and sustainability, which is currently our only international project oriented towards environment, sustainability, and climate change, it's facing difficulties in adoption by our vast network. These difficulties can, based on our assessment, mostly be attributed to our audiences not being interested or not being persuaded enough in such topics, which is probably due to the fact that you mentioned before, that environmental and climate law related studies and topics are not sufficiently represented in faculty curriculums worldwide. So continuing off of everything expanded here on this panel, we ask you actually for advice to improve our capacity building programs for the field of environmental law. For example, like a general question, but pointers, what selling points would you suggest us to point out? What subtopics, which benefits and career paths to mention, and what steps to take in order to increase the interest of our students and thus the impact of our initiatives in the growingly relevant field of environmental and climate change law? Thank you very much in advance for your answer.
That's a fantastic question, and please stay after the session because I would love to learn some more about what your organisation does. I'm not sure whether any of our panellists wanted to lead on a response to that, or I've got my own comments that I can add. Uma, over to you first.
Wonderful to hear what you're doing, and so many. I think this is a challenge at a lot of law programs have varied amounts of offerings for these topics, and some people come into law school already having some preparation and knowledge of these issues, and many do not. So, and certainly even if they do, if you don't learn the legal frameworks, then you end up having to learn about it on the job. I think that one of the ways would be that you could encourage this would be through the bar associations to build this awareness. Now that can be challenging when it is not already existing, but you're the next generation of lawyers. You can begin to create those things. So one of the, even if it's not possible to have courses taught within a law school, which is of course ideal if it can be, but those of you who are studying this can be the leaders within your bar associations to create the programs, create the opportunities for exchange with others, which you're obviously already doing within at the level of student, which you won't be for long, right? Soon you'll be the practicing lawyers of bar associations of your own. So I would say you can begin by being leaders in that area.
I will just add that I fully support my colleague's statement. You can start from the collaboration with local bar associations and law firms. We, as Grant Azerbaijan, we have cooperated with the ELSA that is represented in Baku, and we provided certain lectures on different topics in the past years, not on environmental law, unfortunately, but first we will also be happy to contribute to whatever you will be offering to the attendance of your events, plus some internships can also be discussed with law firms, and that may make even more attractive your programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to this question asker over here next, please. And I should say, if we don't get through all of your questions, please do stay back afterwards. We certainly want to respond to them if we run out of time here. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Very wonderful panel. My name is Caleb Adebayo. I am from Nigeria. I wear two hats. I'm a lawyer, a finance lawyer working in New York. I also run a nonprofit, an environmental nonprofit in Nigeria called Earth Plus Sustainability Network. My question, actually two points / questions. The first is, one thing that I saw while doing my LLM at NYU Law that I think could be, and I would love to see the IBA do if it's not doing already, is we had a clinic, a law clinic that was for the it was a United Nations clinic. And what we did was that we were working with the small island developing states, the Maldives, the bunch of them, and students will be sent to their missions, their UN missions to the their missions to the United Nations, and we would work with them in developing their presentations at the UN on anything having to do with climate change, having to do with sea level rise, having to do with deforestation, just going there to provide the legal capacity that they need, because most of them do not have enough people to work on those issues. So that's something I think that if the IBA can begin working with law schools across the world, really, particularly in Africa, where we don't see a lot of these things, where we can have young people who are in law school provide support to perhaps law firms that do not, many times law firms don't invest a lot in international law because it's not perhaps as profitable as the direct commercial law they are doing for the people there. So having something like that might be great to just push that climate message to say, we have students who can support you in the legal aspect of climate change. The second thing is, Dr. Lang, this is on the IBA. So I noticed that, so there's a scholarship that the IBA does every year for young lawyers to come to attend the conference. And next year is going to be in Toronto. And I noticed that this year in Mexico, there was the essay for the environment, energy, and natural resources was not there. The other different departments or the different headings or subjects were there. There was, I think there's tax, there's Africa, there's a couple of other ones, but there was none for the energy and environment. I think that we should try to sustain that and ensure that these topics, as much as possible, are topics geared towards climate change and sustainability under the energy heading, and that these young people, when they eventually get it, they are able to speak on their paper at the conference. It would encourage them to even push, whatever paper, whatever publication, and pass that message on even at their bar associations. And so these were two things I just wanted to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matthias, I'm not sure whether you had any comments on that second point.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that suggestion. It's actually one that we have discussed, that we should improve on this piece. Yes, we have a scholarship for the annual conference, and we want to encourage young lawyers to do it and then have a role at the different sessions. That actually was always there, but we somehow did not always follow through on this. So I will take that back. It's actually something that we have discussed for the next one already that we're working on. So thank you very much for that. I think it's a very important part. And indeed, this is always the challenge. I mean, you need the personal initiative of individuals, taking a subject. This is my subject. This I want to work on, but sometimes it's helpful if you push institutions to actually make things happen. So thank you for that, and maybe we can speak afterwards on this proposal further. Thank you.
I do really want to highlight and agree with your sort of initial point around, supporting some of that work that couldn't otherwise be done through potentially law students being engaged in that process. Certainly happy to talk to our Young Lawyers Committee about that as well. You call to mind some of the work, for example, of Legal Response International, who you're probably aware of, who are, doing that background work of supporting some of the negotiations, but obviously that's not bringing in law students. So I think that's certainly something that's interesting to think about, and let's definitely catch up afterwards. Thank you very much. Moving on to, we'll go to you and then to the back row. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alfonso from Mexico. I am, well, my question was for Cayo Borges. I'm not sure if he's still here, but I would like.
I'll ask Cayo if he's still online. Ask your question and we'll pass on to him if not.
Thank you. Which advice would you give to civil society organizations performing climate litigation in order to have a bigger impact on their cases? And well, my second question is for everybody. I want to know if your organizations know and promote this an initiative called Lawyers Pledge on Climate Action. Also, like for your group or for your members to be part and to join themselves to this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. We might go to Cayo first. Cayo, did you hear that question?
Yes,
Perfect.
I did.
Yes. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. I think my response would be to make sure that litigation is really understood as a tool that can be used within a broader campaign strategy. Because ultimately, litigation carries a high risk and also it carries high costs. So we need to be mindful that even if the case is really, really strong on its legal scientific basis, we cannot control all the variables, and therefore there is always a risk of a negative precedent setting. There is risk of defeat, but I think anyone who engages on litigation, if it is doing on a strategic fashion, needs to understand that sometimes even if you lose, you win, because then you can have some other positive impacts, like raising civil society or societies more broadly awareness about that issue, leveraging the courts to really put a subject into the mainstream media, or have some kind of symbolic effects of advancing jurisprudence, even though ultimately the court does not award the remedy that is being sought. So I would say that this is, for me, the key aspect of how to succeed on strategic litigation, to understand it as one of the tools that can be used as part of broader strategies for campaigning.
Thank you very much, Cayo. I'll quickly make a comment on the World Lawyers Pledge on Climate Action. I am aware of it, and I think it's just another great example of those legal alliances and legal pledges that we're seeing across a number of fronts. Net Zero Lawyers Alliance is another example. Legal Charter 1.5 based in the UK is another example. And of course, I do apologise, my references are typically quite UK or Australia centric. But that UN expert report that was released last year really highlighted the utility of those sorts of initiatives as valuable for helping to turn the dial. So thank you for drawing it to our attention. Just one more question at the back, and then we might have to close, but please do stay with us afterwards for those of you who have questions that we haven't got to.
Thank you very much. My name is Annette Magnusson, and I represent Climate Change Council based in Stockholm in Sweden. So I had a question to the representatives of the bar associations, because we know your membership and bar memberships are diverse groups of people, and not all would necessarily think that climate change is something that is aligned with their legal practice. And still, you have been successful in adopting these statements and pledges of various sorts. So my question is, what was your winning formula in getting everyone on board as you were adopting these pledges or these statements?
Would anyone like to lead on that? Jutta? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. In Japanese case, yes, in our group in JFBA, there are a lot of diverse people. I mean, lawyers who are not interested in climate change. And so we have to persuade them, but we can attach importance to the mission of lawyers, that is to protect the human rights, fundamental human rights. And the climate change is clearly a big issue for fundamental human rights. So we can refer to the law stating the mission of lawyers for human rights. And so even though there are still so many opposing people in our group, we can adopt such a declaration. And as I told in my presentation, any lawyer should be responsible for protecting human rights, I think. So maybe we can persuade that such a principle. It's in my answer.
Thank you. And I know we are at time now. Just a quick comment, Matthias.
Yes, just very quick comment. I think one important part, though, is always to keep in mind when law associations act. Lawyers act for everyone in defense of the rule of law. And we always need to be mindful that we may not be entirely in line with what exactly our client does, but the client has a right to be represented. And I think there's a potential risk if we push certain parts too far that our clients are the ones who decide what we act for, not the lawyers. Each lawyer has to look at himself, what client he wants to work for. That is correct. But as I think you pointed out, an important part that associations, law associations, need to also take into account that there may be differing views on certain matters. Of course, we all need to protect the climate, but in individual cases, that requires that we represent different parts of our group of clients who may have different views. So I think it's important to be able to have consensus in the associations, in any associations, that you leave room for representation of different clients. And I think where that has been done, it was possible to build consensus.
Thank you. And we are over time now, so we'll finish it there. But I also have some thoughts that I'd love to discuss with you further, Annette, on that front as well, because that's certainly a journey that I'm on in terms of understanding how best to engage with all stakeholders. Because as John Carey said a few years ago, all lawyers are climate lawyers now, whether we want to be or not. So there's that real need to be engaging with every type of lawyer in this space in a constructive way. But of course, people are at different steps of that journey. So there's a range of different techniques that need to be used. I absolutely agree. I'd just like to take a quick opportunity to thank our incredible panelists, both in the room and online. Thank you for your contributions. So could I have a quick round of applause? And also a huge thank you to everyone in the audience and those who shared their questions and experiences. We really appreciated it and look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.